Hello, everybody, and welcome to EContent Live. It is Friday, July 25th, 2014, and we've got a great show for you all about mobile content. We're excited to have with us a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Brant DeBow. Brant from Byte Interactive, Executive Vice President of Technology. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
And we also have Peggy Anne Salz with Mobile Groove, who has been attempting to join our Google Hangout. And as a matter of fact, she's calling me right now. We've been texting back and forth. And that's one of the problems with Google Hangout is, man, it just, for some reason, it just has not caught up yet.
Trying to get everybody in there.
It really is. And it's one of those things we've tried to get it to make it work. And it's still one of those things. It reminds me of my favorite quote about Douglas Adams. About technology. He says, technology is a word that describes something that doesn't work yet. And he's so true. And so I apologize to Peggy Ann. We will have her back, but we're excited to have Brant here, and hopefully she may join in here as we're rolling along. So I'll continue to try to invite her to the conversation as we move through. But Brant, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do with Byte Interactive.
Sure thing. Well, as you said, I'm the EVP of Tech for Byte Interactive. I'm actually one of the two co-founders. And we started about 6 years ago, right when Apple launched the SDK. For the iPhone. And so we build a lot of apps, mostly native mobile apps, for larger brands. And that's really where our focus has been, is trying to get startups and even established brands to bring their all of their company and bring their processes and bring their customers onto mobile and really take advantage of the revolution that's happening in mobile.
So what are some of the favorite projects that you worked on over the years, some things that you've done that you really dig?
Well, the most recent one, I think, was probably we just recently relaunched selecting their own sites. So that certainly was true with us for a long time. So that was actually a pretty fun one. I think one of the apps that we're probably the most proud of is the app that we did for Infinity. We were really challenged creatively and really took a lot of focus across a lot of different disciplines to develop a lot of things that were didn't exist at the time as far as controls, and we did a lot of low-level technical details that bring out more beautiful creative things. So I think that one was one of the ones that we really enjoyed pushing. And along those lines as well, we also did a project for H&R Block that was using Flash to talk to an iPad, and that was kind of another one of those ones where you really you don't like the project at the time. It stretches you very difficult. It's a hard one to get done, but at the end it's pretty amazing. Like when you are actually able to ship it, it's a pretty amazing process to be able to sit back and go, wow, we made a Flash app talk to an iPad and not know that it was actually talking to an iPad. That's pretty fun. So.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So today's show all about mobile content. We're going to share a couple news items and then talk about some different projects and how do we create content for mobile. What are some of the things in the mobile industry that are driving content and the changes within that as well. And hopefully we'll get to some of your questions as well. So one of the first topics right out of the gate is we got to talk about the iPhone 6. In quotes, that may be called something else,
right.
And of course the two different screen sizes. Also Apple, their earnings just came out and we noticed a slip in tablets and iPad sales, but that's across the board. Tablets across the board have been dropping in sales. So when we look at mobile phones and tablets, what are some of the things that you're seeing from the industry side as far as where hardware is leading us? What do we need to be looking out for as far as creating content for different size devices? What can we do to kind of keep up with all that?
Right. Yeah, I think first of all, on the different size screens for the iPhone, it certainly seems that there's definitely a lot of smoke around that fire. There's a lot of things going around there. Apple even mentioned in one of the WWDC talks that there's this tool that you can use to scale the simulator and see a whole bunch of different sized devices for your iPhone content, and it was kind of like, okay, like, are we getting ready for something else? So it definitely seems to be where it's headed. It's definitely one of the segments that, if you want a large size phone right now, it's something that Apple does not do. So it's one of those things that Samsung has actually made quite a bit of money on the high end there, competing in a market that Apple has just not gotten into yet. So I think it's probably coming. I'm pretty happy with I like having small. I think there's a lot of premium in miniaturization, and there's always interesting stuff there. So it'll be interesting to see how they pull that off and how they go with that. As far as the earnings and Apple's, the tablets, obviously now we've had 2 quarters of earnings where iPads have been a little bit softer. And the question with that is this a larger trend that tablets were, a big deal for? I mean, they were a very big deal. The growth curve on them, even trumped iPhones. Really soundly trumped iPhones at the beginning there, and now it seems to have tapered off. And I think there's probably the 2 theories on that are that either this is just a slow, stop for a little bit of a slip, or this is something where, maybe that growth curve is actually, saturated. It's getting close to it. Horace Dediu actually makes a really good argument on the Critical Path podcast around looking at the launch and the trajectory of that curve and the way that things are normally adopted. If you look at fridges and TVs, and you can look at all these different things that as they came out in the culture, they all follow this logarithmic curve. And his take on that is that it would be very interesting science-wise if this was all of a sudden shot straight to 50% and just stopped. It would be this logarithmic curve that all of a sudden didn't fit any, so it's fit all of the rest of the data. It's very challenging to see if it would not fit this data. I think the other thing is that our phones, it's not so much that iPads are not getting used, but that our phones are getting even better. I think we are sort of able to do so much more on our phone that, when Apple launched the iPad, they said this is a device that sits between what you can do on your desktop, laptop, and what you can do on your phone. And as the phone has gotten so many more tasks that it can do, it might be eating into a little bit of that. The iPad sweet spot. The smartphone has just gotten better.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is purely spec out of personal use, but I still have an iPad too, and I've gone through 2 generations of iPhones, but I've not upgraded my iPad, and it's because it still works. It's still using the most updated operating system. All the apps, most of the apps that I want to use still work on it. For me, it was that I used more entertainment, more, hey, I'm reading the newspaper, doing the crosswalk. A work device, which we're viewing our phones as really works, and our tablets as our more entertainment devices. But I would argue that a lot of people are in that similar boat. So it's interesting to me that I've, even looked at buying other tablets and things like that, and I'm like, well, why?
Right.
So I think there's a larger, cliff to scale for people that have already purchased iPads, that have kept them around, that use them for that low snacking kind of consumption.
Right.
As opposed to, as soon as the next, smartphone comes out that I want, I'm going to buy it.
And there's a lot more driving that smartphone. I mean, there's tons more things driving the smartphone than there is driving the iPad. I would probably buy a new iPhone every year just for how much the camera jumps forward, right? Like, I mean, and like that. I'm sure there's, for some other people, it's like maybe for the speed or different things like that. But that really where it is that the smartphones are getting better so much faster, and the iPad really for what you use it for, it doesn't matter if it has a much better camera. I don't generally use it as a camera, right? So there's different things like that. So that's one of the drivers. The other thing is in the United States at least. And a lot of different countries, you have basically a $400 subsidy propping up phones, and every year or every 2 years in the U.S. you're throwing away money basically because they don't drop your monthly rate. You're throwing away money if you're not taking advantage of that subsidy. So that really drives a at least 2 year adoption cycle, and you can definitely see that with the phones. So there's a lot more momentum on that, and I've also heard a lot of anecdotally things, where I had an iPad 1. The next time I bought an iPad 2, I gave my iPad 1 to my mom, and then I bought her this, and so because they've actually had a pretty good life on them, and they've held up really well, especially iPads. There's not as much of a need to replace them, right? So we're kind of seeing that's really the challenge is what's the replacement cycle on these things going to be. Phones are pretty well set. We know it's about 2 years, and everybody has to have one. Tablets are a little bit more. I don't know if every member of the family needs to have one, and if they do, they're probably more like a PC replacement cycle, which is getting on, a little bit, slower of a replacement cycle. So.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see for sure, and again, not only with the announcements from Apple, but from all the other device manufacturers as well. It's going to be interesting to see if tablets will be able to keep that same cycle as smartphones. Right. So let's talk a little bit about content creators, and we have all these great devices now. You were sharing with me some of the numbers as far as the transition from PC to smartphone, as it used to be that the PC was what we created everything for,
right?
And now we're looking at a much larger subset of numbers that we're having to create content for.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the industry as a whole, right, you have about 1.6 billion PCs out there in use, and about half of those are corporate, and about half of those are personal. But no matter what the case, mostly they're locked down, right? Ben Evans likes to say a laptop is portable in that you can pick it up from this desk.
By the way, train break.
Yeah, train break. Here we go.
Train break.
A laptop's portable in the sense that you can pick it up from one desk and set it down on the other desk, but it's not portable in the sense that like a phone is portable, right? And so mostly they stay in place, or they are able to move from place to place, but they are not in motion the way the other devices are. The other piece of that is the personal nature of it, right? So half of those corporate PCs, what goes on them is dictated by an IT department generally. Those are not something that people put their personal information on. Those are things that you keep your work life separate from your personal life.
Right.
Whereas these devices now with a smartphone, that's not the family smartphone the way a computer might be the family computer. That's Brant's smartphone. It's Jose's. And, if I had to switch smartphones with my wife even for a day, I think we would both be confused, right? It's like I put my apps where I want them. I have my apps on there. I don't have your apps on there. It's a deeply personal device. I think John Gruber actually said I think it was the iPad 2, he said it's a shame that we wasted the term personal computer on PCs back in the day, right? Like I wish we had these for the mobile devices. But then also you look at the scale of numbers, and we're already at 1 billion Android phones. We're at about end of this month or end of June, something like that, we're at about 900 million iOS devices. And you look at the number of mobile connections that you have in the global world, and it's about 4 billion phones right now. And all of those are trending. It is definitely a replacement where the smartphone is replacing and eating up all the feature phones. And probably at some point you're just not going to see a carrier even stock feature phones. Even if you don't want a smartphone, you just want to get a phone, you're going to get a smartphone anyway. And so you go from this internet that is mostly shared and mostly locked down devices of 1.5 billion to an internet that has 4 billion, mostly personal, mostly mobile, mostly everywhere devices. And it's a big sea change in terms of what the internet is going to look like when that happens. I shared with you, when it started out, mobile was this weird annex of the desktop internet. I mean, I remember when people were talking about, WAP phones and all the XML stuff and this crazy stuff that you were going to do, back in the 90s. And then, but that was always this other thing over there. And now you see this, 4 billion versus 1.5 billion, and you're looking at, wow, like the annex might actually be what we've all thought of as the internet this whole time. And globally, that's a big change. It's not as as pronounced for us in the United States, where we're privileged to have everything. But a lot of these countries people are jumping over of never having a desktop connection to the internet. 4 billion is a larger number. These are people who have never been privileged to have the access to have this before. So it's a very interesting thing of a broadening of scope of the internet, and really a broadening of the people who can come in and actually take part in the whole thing.
The other thing that really I think is a hang up is screen size. And I look at that jump from PC, the traditional desktop computer, where you had this larger screen size, and now we're jumping to almost quadrupling, if not more eventually, these mobile devices. And we get caught up in the mindset of, when I create content, I first and foremost need to think about screen size. Well, those walls are starting to break down, and I think a lot of it has to do with connected things where you're able to swipe and throw something from your phone up to your TV, and you can do that now with most smartphones if you have a little box or some other interface that you've got plugged into your TV. So I think what we've leaned on as this crutch as, okay, I need to design for screen size first, is really starting to go away, and we're looking more at functionality. And really, I don't care if it's on my smartphone, if it's on my laptop, if it's on my Apple TV, if it's on my
right.
Amazon Fire TV. I don't really care. I just want it to work on all my devices and access content and share things and watch things and interact on whatever screen size. Have you seen a shift as you've gone through working with various clients of, okay, we really need to think about this on a bigger screen. Well, now we need to think about it on a smaller screen. Is that the first question that's asked anymore?
I think, well, it's interesting. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, my background is going through agency world on the web originally, where I was, doing web work really earlier, in the sort of mid-90s type of stuff, and then going to an agency, and you watch a print designer go from designing for print, right, which is a very fixed size and very understandable sort of margin. You can even control that. Sometime you're going to say how big this poster or this piece of this brochure is, to designing for the web. And everyone would have to kind of get through this aha moment that they don't control as much of the variables that you do, on print. And now I think we're kind of really starting to internalize that like, wow, the web really is a crazy amount. It used to be like, you could say, well, 800 by 600, that's basically everybody. They all run their browser full screen, that's what we have. But now you really have this crazy amount of flux in the system.
Remember when we used to be able to design for one standard?
Yeah, that screen
and now
size.
It's 300 different standards.
Yeah, and it really, I remember a funny tweet like years ago where somebody listed all the different sizes of phone that Samsung actually markets, and it literally from the 3 inches up to something like 6 inches, every single tenth of an inch in there. So when you're trying to design for screens, it's free to lock that down and say that this you can edit. I think a lot of that towards flat design. We started out, it was very and pixel exactly where you put stuff on the screen. And like you said, it was a crutch. It's very helpful when you're designing for stuff like that to know exactly where everything's going to fall out, because it's much harder to think in terms of squishy terms of layout, of really, where is this button? Well, it's 10 pixels over here. It's instead of being, where should it be in relation to this text that could float? And I think that's where a lot of the move to flat design has sort of been incorporating that.
So tell me, I know, and for those of our viewers and people that are watching, what the heck is flat design? I think we know about, and maybe some of the other industry folks, but when you talk about flat design, what does that mean?
The overarching concern of flat design, I think, is really bringing the content up to be the focus of what you're designing for. So, in previous rounds, the idea was having lickable buttons, right? Like, they just look so good, they look like something you could lick because they really stand out. And commonly referred to as skeuomorphism, right?
Which is skeuomorphism. Basically, we want it to look like it would in real life, like
yeah, fake
like
it,
the legal
like it looks
pad,
yeah,
showing up as the notes on iOS was oh, well, I know what a legal pad is. I used to
right.
write things
That's where
down
I
on a
write my
piece of paper.
notes.
So we want to take that and make it look
Yep.
like that on the screen.
Yeah, and a lot of that, what you ended up doing is you ended up wrapping a lot of things with a lot of chrome and a lot of like visual things to demarcate out where they are and to make it look like brick and real stuff. And really that sort of has a way of de-emphasizing the actual content that you have there. Your text is now inside of this thing, inside of this little thing, and you're shrinking that down, whereas flat design is a way of trying to bring up what you're actually talking about, the content that you're actually focusing on, bring that to the foreground, and bring a lot of that UI stuff to the background. And also as a designer, not flex as much, to show off all these things. It really is about making the content and making the actual focus of the app shine a little bit more than the actual design of the app.
And that's interesting too, and that brings us to a great point in our next, topic about the content itself. Is that we have seen this shift of we're not just designing things for mobile that are cool for cool's sake, so that they look really cool and, oh wow, I can do this with it. But it's ultimately about, well, what the heck am I looking at, and how does this add value to me and what I'm doing right now in my life? So where are you seeing this shift now of, we're less about designing for design's sake and more about designing for the actual end purpose of what we're trying to get done? Can you give me any examples of what you're seeing as far as, focusing more on the content and what that looks like in an app or on the mobile, in the mobile space?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the exercises we kind of always go through at the front of strategy with a client, is asking what is the job that this app does, right? And what's a user hiring it to do, right? So when I take that initiative to put something on my phone, it's because it's solving something for me, right? Uber stays on my phone because whenever I travel and I need a taxi or taxi-like thing, Uber will get me where I need to go, right?
Yeah.
And they solve that job, and they don't solve a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm not going to go to Uber to read blogs or anything else. They solve one job and they do it very, very well. And that's always what we try and bring apps back to, is what is the exact job that your user is saying, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to get done. And that really is what distills down and focuses the whole app, is having that. Apple, even back iOS 2 when we got started, their focus was write a product definition statement that says exactly what you do and exactly who you do it for, have a good idea of why someone is picking this up. And I think that really is what kind of distills in that focus and acknowledges that this is your relationship with the customer who's put that app on your phone. And it goes for any content, really. Why are they coming to your website? Why are they reading your blog? What is it that you do that is unique and that is something that they can only get from you, your app, your blog, your Twitter stream, whatever it is, so that people say, that's why he's on the list. That's why she's here on my phone. That's why I have all this stuff, because they do such a good job of that.
And that speaks to anyone who's creating content, who's sharing content online, in whether it's mobile format or anything, is that starting with that end goal in mind of what the heck do we want this thing to do in a very, very specific manner. And that's where I see some of the most successful apps and content in the mobile space being prolific, is that it does that one thing very, very well. So what are you excited about? What are some of the things coming down the pike that you're like, oh man, I cannot wait to get my hands around this and have some fun with it and create cool stuff? What are we looking at on the content and mobile space?
I think one of the more exciting things is really, and I think this might be a little bit why the stock market is actually a little bit exuberant about Apple, because nothing's changed, right? That was one of the things that it's kind of funny, is like all of a sudden the stock shot up, and it's like, why is it going up? Because all of us developers at WWDC were high-fiving because they've solved literally our whole list of complaints in one shot. But I don't understand why making us happy makes Wall Street happy. That, it seems weird.
It's typically not the way it is.
But I think the exciting thing is that everyone's realizing that, oh yeah, it might not just be phones. There is a real thing here to say, I'm really excited to see what HomeKit and what HealthKit and Google has their equivalents of a lot of these things. I'm really excited to see some of these things that are things that we could never do before because we're all carrying a supercomputer in our pockets, and with a thumbprint scanner and with, like all these sorts of things that, you can get interested in saying, hey, when I'm home, like right now my Nest does a good job of figuring out auto away. But it doesn't really have to do that if I leave my house and the sensors all can tell you I left my house, change those things. So I think there's a lot of interplay there where we're getting into really exciting interfaces where you have something that tracks your number of steps or your blood pressure, all this stuff can feed in together, and there's a lot more intelligent decisions we can make about a lot of stuff.
There is, and we're not people call it home automation. We're not automated yet.
Right.
It's basically giving me more work to do. I have to go program it, I have to go plug in, I have to turn it on, off, etc. It's adding more apps to my home screen.
Right.
This is not automation, and I hate it when people call it that because it's not even close to that. But we are coming up to that, and I think we're seeing more and more where like if this then that, and
right.
some of their integration with devices and things that have open APIs where I can say if this happens then I want my Nest to turn on, or if I break this circumference around something I want something to turn on or off. So that's becoming a little bit closer to automation. Well, tell me about some of the specific projects that you're working on that are interesting or different or unique that are coming out.
We actually just wrapped a project for a pretty exciting one that is around these lines is a home gardening solution. So they have a mesh network of all these different little devices that can do soil sensors, temperature sensors, all sorts of different little things like that, and they all plug into a sort of brain that can control these things. So you can say, okay, when this plant is getting dry, then turn on the pump and water it. Some things like that. So that was a pretty exciting project. More info to come. I don't want to say too much because they have a show this weekend. I think is where they're kind of their public launch. And we're working on a very exciting startup right now that have something that will be, I think, very useful for a lot of people. I can't say too much about that one because they're in
so
the middle
basically
of
you told me nothing.
Yeah, I basically can't say anything.
Well, that's funny because your company Byte Interactive used to work with a lot of very large brands and still do. But now you said you've started to work with some more startups and folks that are doing some more interesting, unique things. What's that transition been like? Because I know a lot of our viewers and people that are in the content creation space are always looking to the young punks out there in their garage that are doing things that are interesting and unique and seeing how it can affect their business.
Right. Well, I think the biggest one is that change of focus that we were talking about earlier. Generally, when a startup comes in, they have a well-defined problem that they want to solve. So they have a little bit more of an idea of this is what we see, and it's usually, like the best way of developing something is having an itch that you need to scratch yourself, right? So it's something that, like, you look at Marco developing Instapaper, right, or Overcast, and it's something where it's like, well, I'm on the train every day. I don't have cell service on a train, and I've got a bazillion things to read, and like that sort of when people have a real sense of what the problem is, it's very easy to get the focus. A lot of times, the bigger brands will just have an idea that they know they should be doing something. So
everybody else is doing it.
We got to do something. Apps that way. So then you
don't
really
do that.
Right.
Don't do it. And this is one of those that I think it's one of those cautionary tales. Look at those pretty little things, and everybody goes, "Well, I need to have that. I need to have that," or we should have that. If you're not solving real problem, if you're not genuinely helping your customers, whether it's internal, external, whatever, solve a very specific need, then you need to stop what you're doing. I mean,
Absolutely.
really, that is, you don't take anything else away from that. It's that just tools, particularly mobile focused and content, be very, very laser focused, because that's the people. They're like, I want to solve a problem and I want to get it done.
Yeah, and that really is. We actually just wrote an article. My co-founder Joe Farrell wrote one for the HPO that is on why you shouldn't have an app. a company should have an app, and that's kind of where we talk about it as well. Is that if apps are maintaining a relationship, right? It's a long relationship. If your brand is something that the user interacts with, right? Like we did H&R Blocks apps, and that thing where people a lot of times are coming right back to the same tax pro, right? And things, being able to upload your documents, being able to receive messages, those are important aspects of that relationship. We are with a company that's parking, right? And that's other thing, right? No one is going to install an app so they can your type of parking lot, right? Like it's not fluid. It's too much. You don't maintain a long-term
San
relationship.
Francisco will shut down. It's on the news recently.
Right,
They tried to do that. It's like selling parking spaces.
Right. So I mean, that's really where that's one of the rubrics that we do to sort of look at. Should you maintain a long-term relationship? Now, if it's something that's just people coming out, mobile, an actual responsive website is a much better option because people can come in, see it, leave, get what they need to. And then that also is, even if you do have something where you have a long-term relationship, but you might have somebody come in very quickly, and they just need information very quickly, and then it leads into an app. Maybe you need to have a website and an app.
Yeah.
Those are the different things. But as long as you understand why that app goes on their phone, it's really, and this was one of the challenges back doing interactive sites, right? In the beginning, put a 5-minute flash site, and it was like, because I
was part of that.
Everybody did it, right? Like, because everyone was like, well, I know how to do video, I know how to do a TV ad. How about I throw this up there? And we were struggling with the idea that the web is intentional, right? Somebody's got to come to your site, and then they've got to sit through the video. This isn't TV. You don't get to, like, everybody planted on the couch and they're going to sit there unless they're going to the fridge. But apps are even more of an intentional hurdle, because you not only have to get them to come to your website, you have to get them also to install an app, and that's making a commitment to that, to put it on their device, and then they've got to come back to that app, right? So that's a huge hurdle to get over. It's not worth it if you don't have something very focused to try and get people to do, because that focus is what's going to drive people to say, I would never delete that app off my phone. Like, that solves a real problem for me.
So web app versus actual download app. In my mind, I think a lot of it is apps are a transitional technology until we can actually get enough bandwidth and speed and storage to be able to just access things off the internet, as opposed to actually downloading an app and actually having that on my phone. What are your thoughts on developing an app versus a web app? In other words, an actual device that's a piece of software that's on your phone versus just a link to a browser that opens up a web page and you interact with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the Mark Andreessen thesis or whatever. Like, that was his point a while back, that everything is going to end up that way, given the point where you, like you said, where you have enough broadband, you have enough storage, you have enough RAM, you have enough and I think this also really reflects a total difference in focus between Apple and Google, right? This is one of those things where Apple seems to say, you have a rich front end, you have an actual native app. That's the way you do it. Don't use the web like some animal. That's what Ben Evans put it. Don't
some animal.
Don't. Like that's but so Google goes the other way, and now they're putting Chrome tabs in your list of apps, right? So they're clearly taking another state. They're already going where you're saying, which is like, well, eventually maybe there won't be anything where I actually install an app. For distinction between an app is and what an Android is, mostly two different ways of developing. Lean heavily toward the Apple side of things in that, especially currently, right? If you look at the amount of processing power that you have on a mobile device, people forget that the web has benefited a lot from sort of excess capacity of processing, right? Like, the actual processors are much, much better on an Intel than they're using very little power and take it not, burn a hole in your paint because. But that has trade-offs, right? Everything has trade-offs there, and those processors are not anywhere near where our desktop class processors are in terms of being able to render quickly and do those things. I mean, we're talking about really huge factors. Now, that's also closing quickly, right? We made this jump to 64-bit on mobile in like 7 years. That took us like 30 years to do on the desktop. So the pace is definitely accelerating super fast, but we're definitely not there yet for sure. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's, like I said, it's interesting if you look at WWDC versus I/O. Google seems to definitely start to step in that direction of apps and web pages. It's going to get blurry, and then it's going to go away probably.
And ultimately, it shouldn't matter to the end user. They shouldn't even know whether or not they're downloading something or accessing something online. Ultimately, they just want the cab to show up, know where the restaurant is, get their message, send the video, etc.
And be able to find Uber the next time I want to use it. You know, that's one of those other things of the people given the confidence to install, remove, and do all these things with apps that they wouldn't normally have done with the web. They might not have been able to find those things. So I lean, more towards the native side, especially for the current time. But I think the other thing is, as developers, as content creators, as people who are making things for other people, you have to take your ego out of it, or what would make it easy for you as a developer, and you have to say what makes it best for them, right? The clear vote is that they are the ones in charge, and that there's not a lot of apps and there's a limited amount of attention that people actually have on their phone. We did a research study like a year ago, I think, on that, and the overarching theme is that you have to take a backseat to what your customers are doing. And if that makes it harder technically because you got to develop for web, Android, and iOS, then you know what? Like, you better get on it, because you've got to do that. Because somebody else will, right? And they'll serve your customer better because they're doing it. So,
all right. While I'm doing a final thing, I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone and tell me what your top 2 apps are that you use on your phone.
Oh, wow.
And while he's doing that, just a couple of quick plugs. Again, thank you so much to EContent Magazine. And you can go check out. We've got a really cool download. If you go to the EContent website, we'll link it up in the bottom. We have the State of Mobile Content, so you can go download that issue that's got a ton of great articles and a lot of the things that we've talked about and even more around the state of mobile content. So also, Peggy Anne Salz, we will get to you. We will have you on the next edition. And thank you so much again to everybody for tuning in. Brant DeBow with Byte Interactive. Where can we find you online?
ByteInteractive.com. BITE.
Excellent. Great. And all right, finally, what are your top 2 apps that
it's hard
right
to pick
now?
2. I would say one thing that I absolutely love is OmniFocus, and it's OmniGroup does it. It's a task management system that syncs across iPad, Mac, phone, and it's one of those things that I would be lost without it. And I used Android for 3 months just to try and really familiarize myself with it. And OmniFocus is not available on Android, so it's a Mac only shop. So it was very tough for those 3 months to be without it. The other one is Reeder, REEDER, that does RSS feeds, and I keep up with a lot of and makes me know that I've kept up on all the stuff that I keep a handle on. It wouldn't fit. So those are 2 apps that probably fired every single day, multiple times a day on my phone. Things that I think are, wonderfully designed. So.
Awesome. That's cool. Well, I am going to play Let and Open and see what my last downloaded app was. And I hope it's...
This could be embarrassing.
It's Human, Humin. It's a new contact tool app that supposedly brings in all your contacts into one area, pulls from all your different devices and everything, makes it easier to get in touch with people. So I've not played around with it a lot, but it looks really interesting. So
that's an exciting space. I know contacts is kind of a mess.
Yeah. Oh gosh, don't get me started. Guys, thank you for tuning into this episode of Content Live Content, and we will see you on the next edition of EContent Live.